everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our Tiger Talk this week. My name is Lindsay Bray. I am the Senior Coordinator of Parent and Family Services here at the University of Memphis. So today we have Regina Werkhoven, our Title IX Prevention Specialist in the Office of Institutional Equity, here to talk with you about our Sexual Assault Awareness Month and the programs and services available to our students. Regina, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. Excited.
Great. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your work and anything you want to highlight before we get started?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I always kind of like to start any conversation off with is a content warning. I am fairly frank in my discussions about interpersonal violence and sexual assault, which I know is obviously a very sensitive subject for many people. So if this is like a distressing topic for anyone who is listening today, I definitely encourage you to take some time for some self-care, including stepping away if need be. You know, I'm assuming this is up permanently, so you can always come back later and view it. And as for like my actual role, I'd like to give a little bit of background on the Office for Institutional Equity, OIE, itself first. So the Prevention Center is under like the umbrella of OIE, which monitors compliance with the university's policies on like equal opportunity and affirmative action in employment and education. My specific job focuses on Title IX, which is part of the Education Amendments of 1972, which protects people from discrimination based on sex and education programs or activities which receive federal financial assistance. So the Prevention Center was established in 2018, and the goal of our program is to prevent instances of sexual harassment on campus and in the community. We use the Center for Disease Control's Prevention Stop Sexual Violence model, which includes promoting social norms that protect against violence, like bystander intervention, teaching skills to prevent sexual violence, and then supporting victims and survivors to lessen harm, among other strategies. So essentially, we take this model and apply it to educational presentations and trainings around campus, like our freshman ACAD classes and registered student organizations, as well as different programming throughout the year, such as Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Take Back the Night, Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, and the Healthy Relationships Fair. Dr. Molly Anderson, who is an instructor in the psychology department and the Prevention Center's faculty fellow, and I work very closely with other members of OIE, community partners such as the Memphis Area Women's Council and the Shelby County Victim Rape Crisis Center, on-campus partners like Victim Services and Student Counseling Center, as well as like other academic departments on campus. And some of the things that I do just kind of on day-to-day is I organize the online trainings that go out to students, faculty, and staff each year. I'm the chair of the Prevention Task Force, which is composed of faculty, staff, and students, as well as our community partners. We get together 3 to 4 times a year to get updates on the Prevention Center's programming, as well as to alert myself and Dr. Molly about like other campus events and programs that we can help promote or assist with. And finally, I am the advisor for the Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Coalition. This is a student-led organization on campus that is basically an extension of the Prevention Center. They train other students to be like peer educators, so they can give presentations and trainings on sexual assault prevention and assist in planning many of our events. So yeah.
That's fantastic. Your office does such great work on our campus. You talked a little bit about what the office does and Title IX. Can you give us a little bit of history of what Title IX is?
Yeah. So on June 23rd, 1972, Title IX was enacted into law. Title IX prohibits federally funded educational institutions from discriminating against students or employees based on sex. So it begins, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Before Title IX, so this was kind of created for female student athletes. Very few opportunities existed for them. The NCAA was created in 1906 to like format and enforce rules in men's football, but had become like a ruling body of college athletics, and no athletic scholarships for women were offered. And they had like no championships for women's teams. And furthermore, facilities, supplies, and funding were really lacking. So in 1972, there were just 30,000 women participating in NCAA sports as opposed to 170,000 men. So Title IX was designed to correct those imbalances by enforcing like the same access and quality and like things like scholarships, locker rooms, facilities, staff and coaches, things like that. And of course, like many laws, this has evolved over time to include all educational programs and all aspects of the school's educational system, such as interpersonal violence prevention, since that is considered a form of sex gender discrimination.
So fast forward to now, what exactly does Title IX require schools to do right now?
So any school that receives any federal money from elementary to university level must provide fair and equal treatment of the sexes in all areas, including athletics. It requires schools to adopt and publish grievance procedures for students to file complaints of sex discrimination, including complaints of sexual harassment or sexual violence. Every school must have some type of Title IX coordinator, and every school must have and distribute a policy against sex discrimination.
Well, that is really good information to know for our families as to what our requirements are and what we do for our students as well. So when we talk a little bit about your office and particularly in terms of sexual harassment, I know sometimes people have different definitions of those. What are some of the ways that sexual harassment exists, but that people may not think about and may need to be aware of?
So for the purposes of this, sexual harassment includes stalking, sexual assault, and dating or domestic violence. Stalking is any unwanted and repeated contact that makes someone feel distressed or unsafe, or would make any reasonable person feel distressed or unsafe. So examples include like following you around or spying on you, sending you unwanted emails, calling you often when you don't want them to, showing up uninvited at your house, class, or work, leaving you unwanted gifts, damaging your home, car, or other property, and also cyber stalking, stalking people through social media, creating fake accounts so that they can keep getting access to a person who keeps blocking them. And then dating and domestic violence is kind of like all about control and power in a relationship. A lot of people think that dating and domestic violence is just like physical abuse, but that's not the case at all. So obviously it can look things like hitting, punching, pushing, that type of thing, but also there's gaslighting, making your partner feel like they're crazy, making the victim isolated from their friends and family so that it's harder to get support later on when they decide they want to leave the relationship, showing jealousy to the point of controlling who the partner sees, calling them names or cursing them out, threatening violence against them, their pets, family members, friends, making the partner reliant on them financially so that they can't leave because they don't have the money to. And also things like simple as like purposefully like starting arguments at times that it can affect the victim's like work or school performance. So like if a student has like this crazy project coming up and they're with an abusive partner, a pattern might be that every time like a project is due, they're starting an argument, which causes them to mess up. So yeah. And then sexual assault is any touching of intimate body parts or clothing covering intimate body parts without the consent of that person. So this obviously includes rape, grabbing at genitalia, any sort of forced sexual activity, coercion, stealthing. This is a term, this is something that's been going on for, decades, but it's kind of a new thing that we're talking about now. Stealthing is when the perpetrator claims that they'll use protection during a sexual act. So maybe that's birth control pill, maybe it's condom, something like that. And then they either like remove it or don't use it without the other person's knowledge. That's considered not being informed and therefore not consensual. And then also sexual activity with two people with a power imbalance. So like a professor and a student cannot have a consensual relationship because the professor is at, higher up in the hierarchy. Yeah, I think that about covers most of it.
Well, that's really good to know, particularly for our families as they, may have concerns or things like that in an effort to help their student as well. So in terms of our students, if a student feels like they're in this situation or something has happened to them and they're concerned about that, what would they need to do in order to report an incident, and where would they kind of start?
So the best place to start, honestly, would be going to memphis.edu/OIE. You can make a report there. And kind of describe the situation that happened. It's going to go right to OIE, and they're going to be able to talk with the person that submitted the report or the victim that the report is about. You can also go to the Dean of Students offices, or you can also call University of Memphis Police Services as well.
And so within that, can you talk a little bit about what happens when someone reports a claim?
Yeah. So once a report is made, we have an intake coordinator named Emily. She's probably going to be the one to reach out to the victim first to see if they want to set up a meeting, see if they want to talk about what happened and see what the options are. So things like resources are going to be provided to that person, any details that they're willing to share about the incident that happened. And then they can put in some interim measures in place if they need to. So for example, maybe they can, if there's other dorm rooms available, they can maybe switch to a different dorm. They can rearrange a class schedule, help out with assignment extensions if they're, if the incident kind of interfered with that. And then from there, it gets a little more detailed. It kind of depends on what the next step is. So in some cases, some of our students only need resources. They just want those interim measures, and that's fine. Some want kind of a medium amount of action to take place, maybe some sort of compromise between the victim and the perpetrator. So maybe a no contact directive or something along those lines. And basically that must be agreed to by both parties. And if one of them violates that, then it goes to a full investigation. You can also choose a full investigation. That I would recommend, if you want to see how that investigation process works, to go look at our resources. I believe it's GE 2039, I believe. That kind of explains the investigation process.
And if a student does come forward, is that confidential?
We maintain privacy to the best of our ability. We can't guarantee confidentiality simply because there are going to be some things that certain people need to know. So if a report is made, and it varies on a case-by-case basis, it could be that police services got the report and then they have to turn it over to us at OIE. Vague info might be given so that we can put those interim measures in place, but only the people who need to know will know. Now, if a student wants to have this situation remain completely confidential, I would suggest going to a confidential resource. So this would include talking to one of our counselors at the Student Counseling Center, or going to victim services located on campus. And then another option is our off-campus resource, which is the Shelby County Crime Victims and Rape Crisis Center.
And we talk about sexual harassment and sexual harassment prevention in particular, it's often framed around this happening to female victims. Can you talk a little bit about male students and why it's important for them to be well informed and that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for years, prevention measures have been aimed at cisgender women and girls. So, things like watch your drink, don't walk by yourself, don't go out with a guy you don't know, wear modest clothing. And there are a lot of reasons why these are problematic. For one, it puts the responsibility of not getting assaulted on the potential victim instead of placing the blame on the actual responsible party, which is the perpetrator. Another reason this is problematic is that these, so-called safety measures first of all, they're common sense, and we've been told these from like 12 years old. We've all heard these before, and they are women focused. It's completely erasing the fact that men are sexually assaulted. It's also completely erasing the fact that members of the LGBTQ plus community are assaulted. The current US stats say that 1 in 6 women experience completed or attempted rape, and the stat for men is 1 in 33. But honestly, that number is probably higher. Men might feel like they can't report due to like social retaliation, or that they won't be taken seriously. Basically the same reason why women won't report, but especially if their perpetrator is female. As for the transgender and non-binary population, their rates are even higher. So it's really important to understand that anyone can be a victim or a survivor of sexual assault, and also anyone can be a perpetrator too. It's important to recognize both of those things. So when we're talking about like consent, we need to address everyone. Everyone needs to be able to set their boundaries and get consent and give consent. And everyone needs to be included in that.
That's such important information for all of our students to understand. So tell us a little bit about Sexual Assault Awareness Month and what your office does to kind of get that out there.
So it's in April, so it's going on right now. During this time, we hold many events to bring like awareness, education, and prevention to campus, more so than usual anyways. So we hold some of our bigger events during this time, like the Healthy Relationships Fair. Unfortunately, COVID kind of ruined that one for us. And also Take Back the Night. It can be done kind of either in the fall or the spring. And this is a very powerful event that has been around since, the 1970s to support survivors, bring healing, and bring hope to survivors of sexual assault. So all of our events are basically virtual this semester. And we know everyone is Zoomed out and things like that, but hopefully we get, some participation and people can get some good education out of it.
Yeah, I do. When it did get to be in person, I know there were some really powerful events, and hopefully people will take advantage of those this year as well, even if we are a little bit zoomed out.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit some of the trainings and some other things. Can you talk a little bit more about those trainings and resources that are available for our students?
So like I kind of said, in terms of resources, as said earlier, reports can be made to OIE and some interim measures can be put in place. We also have the Student Health and Counseling Center that offers 12 free sessions to students per year and unlimited group therapy. And if anyone has ever been to counseling, they know that stuff is expensive. So I really encourage students to take advantage of it while they can. And then there's tons of off-campus resources, which you can find more information on at memphis.edu/Title IX, Title IX. And then on campus, we also have victim services, and they offer resources on like advocacy, how to proceed with like legal matters. They can connect you with other resources, things like that. Oh, and then as for trainings, we can present to any student organization, faculty or staff department or class about any combination of various topics. So for example, I'm actually doing one with the Navy ROTC this week, and then next week I'm doing one with the orientation guides. So some things that we cover in our presentations is any combination of characteristics of unhealthy versus healthy relationships, consent, like what consent is and how to give or receive consent, boundaries, like the different types and how to set them, how to support survivors, how to report, overview of like what Title IX does, getting involved on campus is a big one, obviously resources, which we go over, bystander intervention. So just, this might not be a super familiar term. This is an effective approach to preventing interpersonal violence by increasing confidence and like the skill set of the community to respond to problematic situations before they escalate. So, checking in on someone and making sure they're okay with the person they're talking to. Just if you notice that someone's feeling uncomfortable, distracting, like saying, oh, everyone's cars are being towed, and being able to check in on that person. So just different ways of being able to prevent something from happening that keeps everyone safe. And then if you feel like your group needs something specific and it relates to Title IX, we can definitely work with them to come up with something.
That's so good to know that those options are out there and they can be done in a smaller group setting too, so that students feel comfortable in those spaces as well. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how our campus kind of helps to empower survivors of sexual assault?
Yes. So first of all, we know it's important to listen to them and validate their experience. It's difficult to tell their story, like to hear and tell these stories. And it takes a lot of courage to talk to someone about that. And we absolutely recognize that. We also do our best to let the student lead the process. Just because they file a report, it doesn't mean we have to conduct a full-on investigation. We know that some people might not feel comfortable with that for, a variety of reasons. Some people just want resources or some measures to keep them safe rather than going through like a grievance procedure, and that's fine. Autonomy is really important in the process for a survivor. And now, of course, there are some exceptions to that depending on risk factors. So, for example, if we're concerned about overall campus safety, we might have to, break that rule essentially. But again, this is on like a case-by-case basis. And within the Prevention Center, we try to have some we do have some programming that empowers survivors. So one example is Take Back the Night. And I talked about this a little bit, but it provides a space for survivors to feel safe, heal, and maybe be inspired to tell their story to allies and other survivors if that's something that they want to do. During this event, people are really able to reflect, hear people tell their stories, and we also even have counselors available in case someone needs to speak to someone confidentially.
That's really great that we have those resources available and are really trying to help our students in the way that they want to, and not try and force that on anybody. So we've talked a lot about what's available for students and how they might be able to access those resources. But if a parent or family member has a concern kind of about their students, and is there a way that you all recommend that they kind of reach out to U of M about that concern?
So I got this information from our intake coordinator, since she's the one who works directly with our students to make reports and things like that. So what I got from her was that the answer kind of depends on the situation, what time of day it is, and if the student lives on campus. There are some background things that, can make communication with your child easier, but obviously life is messy and things don't always go to plan. So in preparation for when things don't go to plan, talk to your student about signing like a FERPA release with the school. And that says that we can communicate with this, or you can communicate with the school about them, and make sure the information that they've listed for emergency contacts is up to date. If your student is living on campus, make sure you know their housing info, like their building and dorm room number, and trade contact info with any like roommates or RAs. So these are good for those times when you haven't heard from your child in a while, and you're kind of worried, but it turns out that they just passed out from doing all their finals and they didn't have their phone plugged in. But in general, when you've got a concern about the safety of your child and you're not really sure who to call, I would say call University of Memphis Police Services. So UMPS is like the best option because they operate 24/7. They have emergency training. They have a direct line to like the on-call crisis counselors, and they know who to contact in residence live for more specific issues. If your student lives off campus, call 911, Memphis Police Department, local area police. If the situation isn't really an emergency, you can reach out to the Dean of Students office because they can either help you directly or get you in contact with the correct people. And then you can also report a concern about a student online. It's just memphis.edu/report.
Yeah, and I will say for our families too, if you're ever confused about that, our office is also happy to help with that. Our residence life office, if they live on campus, does do a good job of checking in on students. And usually it is just they've let the phone die or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I know is unusual, but in case of issues.
Mhm.
We don't want you to have to drive 3 hours if you're concerned about your student, and it is just that.
Yeah.
So as well for parents and family members, so what would you kind of recommend they do to kind of help educate their students on sexual assault awareness?
The first thing that always comes to mind is please teach your child about consent and boundaries. Learn about what consent means and make sure your child understands it. Teach them not only how to set their own boundaries with other people, but also how to respect other people's boundaries. So here's an example. If your child, let's say it's a high school student or something, your child asks someone out, that person says no. Instead of saying something like, oh, well, you can always try again, maybe they'll change your mind, say, okay, they said no. It sucks, but that's their decision and you need to accept that. RAINN.org, RAINN, has some great tips on teaching consent to everyone from 2 years old to adults. And then if they didn't receive it in school, or if it was maybe somewhat lackluster, you might want to have the oh so wonderful sex ed talk if you haven't done it already. The CDC has a pretty good fact sheet on talking to your teens about sex. So you can just go to cdc.gov and in the search bar, just type talking to teens about sex, and it should pop right up. And even though obviously your kids are college age now, there is still some good information that you can kind of fine tune to be more age appropriate. And then another big one is lead by example on showing them what healthy relationships look like, whether it's a romantic partner, another family member, or even with them. So things like having good communication, having respect for each other, equality, allowing autonomy and independence to an age appropriate extent, of course. Taking responsibility if you mess up, or if the child messes up, teaching them how to take responsibility for that, and showing compassion. So demonstrating these are going to help your child know what to look for in their own relationships, whether that's romantic or even just with like friends and family members.
Those are great tips for all of us, no matter how old we are, I think, and
Yes.
helping us all understand that and managing our relationships, whether they are romantic or friendships or anything, or work related or anything like that, creating those boundaries and helping others understand. So I think those are great tips. Well, lastly, in terms of parents and families, what are kind of your recommendations if they do have a student who has experienced sexual assault, and how can they help to support their student through that?
This is obviously tough. This is a worst nightmare type of situation. First and foremost, if they disclose it to you, you've got to stay calm. It is completely understandable that the first thing that you might want to do is break down or even try to maybe take care of things yourself. But it's very important that you are able to be in the moment, listen to them, and listen to what they're willing to share with you. This is about them, and that should be the focus in the moment. 2, do not try to pressure them into telling you more than what they want to share. They're already so courageous for coming to you. Like, it's hard to talk to a parent about this type of thing. So don't ask a lot of detailed questions, because 1, they may not remember parts of the event that happened. That can be a response to trauma. And 2, they might just not be ready to share it with you, and that's okay. Remember, something happened to them where they were not able to have control over what happened. So it's important to let them have control over the situation. You want to definitely validate them. Say something like, thank you for telling me this. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for you to come to me with this. Believe them. Do not downplay what happened to them. Do not victim blame. Believe them and help them in the way that they want to be helped. A lot of people, unfortunately, believe that a lot of rape allegations are false, and that is not the case at all. Between 92 to 98% of rape allegations or sexual assault allegations are true. So you have a much better chance of believing the victim when they say they're a victim than believing otherwise. You're going to want to seek resources, not only for them, but also for yourself. You're going to want to get the basics done, of course, making sure they're okay physically, but also think about emotional health. ask them if they're willing to consider counseling, go to the rape crisis center, going to the doctor, filing a report, etc. And obviously, this is once you're both in a place where you can do this. For things like, completed rape, obviously, we encourage everyone to go to a doctor and get that checked out, so that way they can, do a rape kit and all of that. But we know that for a variety of reasons, some people may not want to do that. So you've got to respect that. And this is once you're in a place to kind of have these discussions. And I would highly encourage parents and family members to receive their own counseling too. What your child went through was trauma, and your child is an extension of you. And it's very possible that you have now experienced vicarious or secondhand trauma from listening to that story. And that can really take a toll on you. And then again, for more information on supporting survivors, you can go to rain.org. They have tons of information available to parents and family of survivors. They have, different myths and how to combat them. Another way is just trying to change the culture. Make sure you know the rape myths and the actual facts behind them. I don't know if we have time for this, but I can kind of go over a few of those if you want me to. Because there are a lot of misconceptions. But yeah, for support, for how to support a survivor, rain.org. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to mention those, that would be great.
Yeah. So I could give a whole presentation on this, honestly, but I'm going to go over just the most common ones. There's one myth: victims provoke rape when they dress provocatively, act sexy, or go to someone's room or house or a bar. The fact is that rape is never the victim's fault. It is a crime of violence and control. It is not sex. And it stems from the perpetrator's determination to exercise power over another person. Neither a person's clothing nor behaviors are invitations for unwanted sexual activity. Forcing someone to engage in this is rape or sexual assault, regardless of the way that that person dresses or acts. If the way a person dressed actually was a reason why sexual assault occurs, then people who dress modestly for religious or cultural reasons wouldn't be assaulted, and that's not the case. Another myth is that most rapes are committed by strangers who hide in vans or dark alleys, but in reality, most sexual assaults, 8 and 10 victims know who their perpetrator was, whether it was an acquaintance or an intimate partner. It's not rape if it happens after drinking or taking drugs, but a person under the influence of drugs or alcohol can't actually consent to a sexual activity. So it's really important to know your partner's limits and sexual boundaries concerning alcohol and other drugs before initiating a sexual activity. A big one: if the victim didn't fight off the perpetrator or try to run away, it means that they wanted to have sex. We think a lot of fight or flight when it comes to dangerous situations, but there's a third one that's really common, and that's freeze. It's very common to become almost catatonic almost when in danger. It's kind of the body's way of just trying to survive the event. So just because someone didn't kick, scream, whatever, it doesn't mean that they were okay with the assault occurring. A big one that's come out recently, especially with the Me Too movement, is if someone reports a sexual assault years after it happens, they must have made it up to get attention. And also, most allegations are false anyway. I've already gone over the false allegations numbers, but there's a lot of reasons why a survivor may not report the assault immediately. First of all, only 3 in 10 rapes are reported to law enforcement. It's not easy to talk about being raped. The experience of retelling what happened may cause the person to relive the trauma. Other reasons for not immediately reporting or not reporting at all include fear of retaliation by the offender, fear of not being believed, fear of being blamed for the assault, fear of being re-victimized. And then if the case does go through the criminal justice system, the victim may feel that the offender will not be held accountable. Brock Turner case is a really good example of that. Also, at the time of the assault, they may not have realized it was rape. It might have not even been something they remembered. It may, again, trauma has some weird responses. And there's a very solid chance that it's a resurfaced memory that comes up years later, maybe through therapy or something like that. and they might be experiencing like shame or shock. So yeah, there's just tons of reasons why someone might not report immediately. And then the last one is only young, pretty women are sexually assaulted. Talked about this earlier. Anyone, cis male, cis female, non-binary, transgender, intersex, anyone can be sexually assaulted. So yeah, I think that covers the most common ones, but there's tons of others that are out there.
Well, that's really good to know those misconceptions too, because I think it helps to break down those barriers of understanding for people who, if they're older than us, may, you grow up with those as well, and breaking down those barriers are a really good part of this process too, to get information out. So as we kind of wrap up, is there any kind of last pieces of advice you have for families, or anything else that you really feel like they should know in order to help their student?
Yeah, just know, like, we are here for you. There are ways to get involved. There's some great organizations on campus, whether in like student leadership positions, like, our frosh camp counselors or orientation guides, our, student government association, and then also the one that I run, or not run, but I'm the advisor of, SAPAC, who do some great work with the students on campus, and doing a lot of like promotion, bringing awareness. So definitely I encourage students to get involved, and having that support group can be really helpful through these very trying years. And as for parents, make sure you're just kind of checking in, keep, maintaining boundaries that your child sets, as difficult as that might be. I remember being in college and my mom being attached. So I definitely understand that. And this is like a time of learning and growing. And the more that we can kind of teach the stuff that I kind of talked about today, that's going to help lessen the amounts that occurs on campus. So my goal is to work myself out of a job, basically.
I like that goal. I think that's a very admirable goal. And I hope you work yourself out of it. Like, I can only hope.
Yes.
Well, Regina, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all our families for watching. We will include all of the links that were mentioned in the description as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us or to Regina as well. I'm sure she's happy to answer those questions as well. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you again for our next Tiger Talk.